we need to be careful, because we want people to be inspired by politics, right? We want people to participate and to be engaged and to feel that it's meaningful. That aspect, that is something actually that populists do well, right? They galvanize large numbers of people, make them feel. Where it goes wrong is the sort of very simple claims that turn out not to be true, attempts to manipulate people. So I think we need to sort of, as democratic societies, think about what does it mean to inspire, what does it mean to engage, but at the same time, we can't fall into using the techniques of those who try to slice and dice and divide us into different camps of us against them. So there is a balance to be struck somewhere, and I think that a lot of countries are wrestling with this.
This is the Policy Digest, a Center for Policy Analysis podcast that explores how African societies are governed and how people and their leaders are shaping the future of their communities. Through candid conversations and insightful analysis, we aim to provide a deeper understanding of the political, economic, and social landscape of Africa. So sit back, relax, and get ready to explore the diverse and dynamic world of African governance.
In the last year's presidential election, you could have seen a deepfake by the president who chose not to stand, Joe Biden, which was in his own voice, but expressing an opinion which is entirely different. Imagine yourself, you as an individual, you're a political leader, but you get to a point where someone is manipulating technology in such a way that misrepresents what you are saying. But that is just not it all. From the beginning of time, technology has always been a force for good, and we always see it that way. But we all know that where the atomic bomb came, Einstein had a few regrets. Which means that even if atomic bomb were good and created a lot of mutual assured destruction value to the world, we need to start talking about things like disarmament, the nuclear, ensuring we don't get to a nuclear war. So the idea is that technology always has a bad side, and we need to have certain questions that we have. So specifically during this podcast, we want to get into the emerging trends that are shaping democracy globally. More specifically, aspects that have quite a lot to do with technology and how it is reshaping all the tenets of democracy, be it accountability, participation, representation, and more importantly now that almost every African country is going to an election, the question of election. And in order to do that, we are joined by Ben Graham-Jones. He's an election consultant. Ben has worked on more than 40 elections across the globe. He has advised organizations, including the European Commission, the Qatar Center, the Commonwealth, and has delivered advice directly to multiple heads of government. Ben holds degrees from the University of Cambridge and King's College London, London's Department of War Studies, and is also a Churchill Fellow. So we want to start by welcoming you. Welcome.
Thanks, Joseph. It's great to be here.
We're glad to have you here at the Policy Digest podcast. I just wanted to start right into why you chose to focus quite a lot of time on issues elections. What drives your interest in elections? 40 elections across the globe.
I think.
Do you wake up thinking about the elections?
I mean, it's difficult to get it out of your mind. It's stuff which means. I guess when I was studying at university, I wanted to involve myself in work which was meaningful, which meant something. And I've always been a great believer that we all have exactly the same set of rights, to be able to make decisions about our lives. And so for me, when we talk about elections and when we talk about democracy, it's necessarily an international conversation. And I think it's from that realization that I began to become interested in elections. I also became interested in how elections were changing, and around a decade back, it became really clear that technology was just playing such an important and increasing role in elections, and so that's really how I found that unique intersection between democracy and technology.
That's quite introspective, and I know you've done quite a lot of work around, getting into the future of how democracy is shaping up and technology as early as 2015, 2016. So I just want to get into that. I understand you've kind of observed elections in quite a number of countries. How do you think technology is shaping up democracy, specifically elections?
Well, I was quite taken with your intro, actually, Joseph, where I think you put your finger right on the pulse that technology can be a force for good and it can be a force for bad. And we've seen your campaigns on social media engage your younger voters and provide an avenue for political participation in many places. We've seen incredible innovations like chatbots that provide voter education. So we've seen all these ways in which technology has been used for good. And at the same time, we've seen coordinated information operations. We've seen problems with voting machines in different places. So it's really, technology is a tool, and it really depends on how we as human beings decide to use it.
Are there any specific cases of countries you've kind of observed? Are they away from voting machines, maybe biometric verification? I saw Ghana here and there. Are there any countries that shocked you in terms of how they use technology and in their electoral cycle?
Well, I think there's one of the things which I often find in this line of work is that you will come across uses of technology which can be quite positive and sort of shock you in quite a positive way. I think that something that was quite interesting from the Kenyan election, for example, that I worked on as an observer was seeing how they had a system where they would take a photo of the sort of results copy from within the polling stations, and that would then be uploaded online. And so if you were a voter, you could actually see the sort of process of results aggregation taking place on your smartphone. Yeah, in real time.
Results would be available publicly for anyone.
Precisely, exactly. And so that meant that claims that might otherwise be made about that process, if you're a voter, you could go and literally check it yourself by looking at your phone.
Sure.
So that was an example of something which I found was quite interesting. But also you'll see elections where there can be disinformation, particularly manipulated images, which can be incredibly harmful and hurtful and personal. And you think about the effect that has on dissuading people from participating.
Yes, and an election day, things are kind of tight. Mm-hmm. If, let's say, a picture is flagged on social media saying, say, an opposition political candidate has been arrested, that can potentially tilt an election. But I also know that people who tend to misuse that sort of risk. Within your observation missions, have you seen some internet shutdowns?
So shutdowns are a long-standing challenge, and the UN General Assembly passed a resolution a number of years ago stipulating that the same rights that we have offline apply online. Right? We don't lose our right to freedom of expression just because we're using a computer or just because we're losing a smartphone. Now, last year, I think Access Now documented several hundred incidents where the internet was shut down in some way across tens of different countries. And that's a huge challenge. I mean, of course, it's a huge challenge for individuals who just want to communicate even things which have got nothing to do with the election. They might be running a business. They might be just trying to live their lives. But it also poses serious problems for election integrity. And that's because it makes it difficult, for example, to conduct a parallel vote tabulation. And that's where an organisation might be counting up votes to try to check the authenticity of the official results.
Data.
Can't do that without internet.
Yes, you can't, just like what you said in Kenya I did observe the election petition by William Ruto against Raila Odinga against William Ruto. A lot of evidence and debate had a lot to do with those DR forms and how they're being transmitted. And the court said that the system is as transparent as it can get. So in terms of like just weighing the risk, I totally understand people have the right to express themselves, but you said you are a political scientist, you did political science at university, rights can be limited. Do you think states have within themselves the right to let's say prevent the risk of disinformation and maybe the tampering of the momentum around elections by asserting their right to limit that right through an internet blackout? Or do you think the other right supersedes this very right?
So I personally, I don't think there is any evidence out there that an internet shutdown does anything to counter belief in disinformation. I haven't seen any evidence that suggests that by closing down the internet that leads to any positive consequence whatsoever. But I've definitely seen evidence that generates mistrust. It generates suspicion, and I've worked in contexts where there have been shutdowns imposed, and you see the contribution that makes to sort of tensions. So no, and I think that. I think that increasingly, actually, if you look at this year, it might be too early to tell, but there've been quite a number of countries that have held elections, which have imposed a shutdown in the past, but which didn't this year, according to Access Now data. So I don't know. I mean, there was a shutdown in Belarus earlier in the year, but generally, are we? I hope that we can collectively, as a global society, recognise that closing down the internet is not a legitimate thing to do. It doesn't practically work either, and can perhaps move beyond this technique of stifling freedom of expression.
I hear you. So I understand that you did do a lot of analysis on how social media was being leveraged as a source of good information, but also as a source of propaganda, and to sort of tilt the democratic will of people, specifically within Kenya. But I also understand you've done quite a number of elections. So I just wanted to know your political analysis of whether social media as a tool serves as a genuine democratic tool, or we should see it as a democratic risk in the short and long term.
I think it's both, Joseph. In my view, I think that there was a narrative a number of years ago that social media was democratizing information, that it was taking information out of the hands of monopolies like a monopolized media sector, and bringing information flow to everybody. And I think now we're realizing that it's a bit more complicated than that. Money still really affects the information that you see online. Algorithms affect what you see online, and that's why what I call for is transparency. And we've seen some really concerning trends in that regard. We've seen social platforms, for example, restrict access to for researchers to important insight and data from their platforms, which those researchers actually need to be able to effectively rebut disinformation. If you want to respond to disinformation, you need to understand what disinformation is flowing online. Likewise, if you want to properly regulate campaign finance, you need to understand how online advertising is being financed. And actually, when we look at the data that's provided, we see very large disparities quite often, where platforms will provide a lot more information relating to the financing of ads in some places, in Europe, for example, but they won't provide the same level of transparency when it comes to elections here in Africa. And I think that's a big problem.
Yeah, and maybe I think must have been the last election stay, the US presidential election. There was a concern that certain candidates were getting more algorithmic amplification for the information, that someone could easily tell that this platform is red. Do you think that there's a power problem around algorithms and who can have access to them? Do you think we need to do something about it, especially that would mean someone is controlling an election technically from the. I don't think it's behind a phone. It would be behind a server somewhere.
So I think that, I mean, I wasn't here in Uganda. I can't speak to the specific context. I wasn't here myself. But just as a general point, algorithmic transparency, which I think is an incredibly important thing. We need to understand, when we look at our notifications and we see information, why are we seeing that information as opposed to other information? And every social platform has a means of prioritizing what appears on your screen, and it's in order to have a baseline of an equal playing field, we at least need a transparent playing field, and that means platforms need to explain what goes in to making those algorithmic decisions. And it's not easy. It's quite a technical area, but I think some of those social platforms have actually done reasonable work in trying to communicate some of the things that go into the mix. If they then took the next step of making sure that researchers have got proper access to data, I think that would help in increasing
in
trust.
Comparatives and some form of analysis. I get you, but if we're to infer the idea, which is he who pays the piper calls the tunes. I understand some platforms limit, say, political advertising. I've seen TikTok be careful in that area.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether they do it for everyone, though. I'm not sure about how transparent that is. So is it platforms that actually amplify these issues, or is it money?
It's a really good point, and I think we need to remember that a lot of payments can be made off platform to amplify content or to generate.
What do you mean by off platform?
What I mean is, for example, payments to influencers. There are sometimes allegations that influencers can receive payments, and they might have a very big audience online, and in return for that payment, they might then promote political content to their audience.
Such issues, yeah.
Exactly, and that will never appear on the ad library of that platform.
If you're monitoring the data.
Exactly, you're not going to see that. But if you had good access to what we call the platform API, which is what allows us to understand how content flows on a platform, then you would at least be able to have a better understanding of the impact of that payment.
I got you. I don't know. Is there anyone who monitors such narratives? Let's say you do research in this area. So I imagine that, let's say you're cataloging data for analysis before you analyze. Do you just analyze just patterns? Let's say you type poverty as a word and you just get everything that comes with poverty. How do you ensure that does not get out of the loop of the data as you do analysis on your end?
Sure.
Because it looks like a significant amount.
Yeah, well, it's tricky, isn't it? With the opacity, it's always difficult to know. But I think that there's a couple of sources of transparency there. One is investigative journalism, which is incredibly important. If you really want to get to the bottom of questions of how is money affecting politics, then a climate in which journalists can conduct their work freely is incredibly important, and that includes things like access to information laws, which are implemented, and making sure that journalists have the resources that they need. I think secondly, there's a lot of think tanks and CSOs across the world who are doing excellent work in trying to bring that transparency at a parliamentary level, and I know that some of the work on Parliament Watch, seeing the means by which you try to bring that transparency, I think is incredibly important. But it's a huge task, and unless the social platforms provide the tools, it's very difficult to get the data.
What would it take? I understand big tech it has its own power as well. It finances quite. I think it must have even a hold over some significant players in politics, to the extent that maybe you can only exert as much accountability. How would we hold them to account on that? Because it would mean that who he wins the election is the one who is amplified most by big tech. How do we hold them to account better?
I think making the case with clarity. I think when people see, for me, the most powerful thing is when you see a comparison from the ad library of an ad in one country where it's where the platform provides that transparency, and then you see next to it an ad from another country where they don't, and you see how much data is missing in the second context compared to the first. For me, that there's a sense of injustice there, and it's a really powerful illustration. So I think making sure that people are aware, including at parliamentary level, of the importance, that people understand how money affects their elections is incredibly important.
Yeah, it's a bit because I sort of agree, even in a local context here. Sometimes you're sort of debating a person. You don't know whether you're debating with one persona of themselves or another persona of themselves. If more transparent, like online, specifically, if you're, let's say, debating that influencer, would you be debating with the actual source of the idea or the fetish of the idea? It's quite something. Just maybe to get into something a bit global. So I understand that the manipulative use of AI is not just a domestic concern. We understand like powerful countries, especially countries that have a record of working in the grey, are actively experimenting with AI-driven tactics to influence public opinion, domestically and abroad, and spread mass disinformation and undermine trust in democratic systems. So the research that you did, I did read that kind of research, is that those actors tend to use AI to manipulate democracies, especially those that are smaller and more vulnerable, including those in Africa. How do you think democracies in the global south can protect themselves against that emerging problem?
I think the first thing is to make sure that the evidence is there. So, for example, understanding who people trust in the country is really important if you want to respond to that type of complex disinformation. Because if you know that people will trust, let's say that might be academics, that might be CSOs, that might be community leaders, then those are the voices to empower in communicating fact-based information. But if you don't have good polling and good data on the issue of trust, it becomes very difficult to respond strategically. I say that's the first thing. I'd say the second thing is to bear in mind one of the most important things we've learned the last few years, which is that it's not all about how realistic it is. 5 years ago, we thought that deepfakes were going to arrive and all of a sudden the world was going to collapse and nobody would know what to believe. And every
year...
Quite
alarmist, right?
Exactly. And every year I was thinking, I'm waiting for the big deepfake election. I'm still waiting for the big deepfake. And yes, we have had deepfakes and they have had a big impact. That's true. But if you look at like the Indian elections last year, for example, what you saw was that cheap fakes, so videos where they might add the wrong subtitles or sort of slow it down or make actually quite simple adjustments, but they had actually just as much impact. And when you look at the data, what it shows quite clearly is that it's not just about how realistic disinformation is. It's all about, was it shared by a family member? Has it been shared multiple times? In what context did you read it? And those things matter as well. I'd also say, just to add to that this isn't just about disinformation. It's also about information that might, for example, be nominally true, but is presented in a certain way to influence someone's opinion. That stuff can be very powerful as well.
Yeah. Half truth is as dangerous as real truth. And I agree with you here. I think generally, I don't think anyone follows this anymore, but there is a time people used to, with sort of someone saying they are Nigerian oligarch who has inherited wealth, they're here to serve you, they kind of send you an email. A few people fell, but like you said, with time when authorities sort of come and speak against it. So it becomes anti-culture for you to fall for such a thing.
Right.
So I think that has a lot to do with community trust. And I'm glad that you sort of talk about like community solutions to sort of dealing with the problem. So maybe in terms of the analysis you've seen globally, how do you see communities owning this technology and also sort of also being responsible for dealing with its harms? How do you see the concept of community forging up?
I think it's absolutely vital, and it's becoming more important by the day. But one reason why it's becoming more important by the day is because what AI has done is it's enabled hostile actors to spread information manipulation at scale. So they can do a lot more of it, much for less cost. There was an example. There's a great organization in Taiwan called Doublethink Lab. And they wrote a good report on this, on an information operation, which was basically a series of misogynist claims against the then outgoing president, Tsai Ing-wen. And that was all released to try to influence the election.
Yep.
But what the manipulators had done is they had basically written a book. They'd used AI to write a book full of all these ridiculous claims in order to try to lend credibility to it. Now, that's quite an extreme example, but because AI allows for the production of this stuff at scale, it means that it localized disinformation is becoming a real thing, and that's why the community, which is operating at that local level, full of people, full of networks of trust, has such an important role to play across the globe in responding to that new scale of disinformation.
I like when you say people are saying deepfakes are coming and are going to turn things around. And they didn't see the community coming, did they? The communities are quite resilient against threats, actually. So in the second segment of the podcast, we're going to look at a fundamental threat to the legitimacy of elected governments, which is participation, and which mostly is looked at in terms of the voter turnout. I understand Ben has done quite a lot of work around observing different elections. He'll be telling us more about that, and as we dig into other aspects too. Stay tuned.
The Center for Policy Analysis is an independent think tank shaping parliamentary democracy, governance, and public policy in Uganda and beyond. Our mission is to shape public policy and strengthen democratic governance by delivering high-quality research, fostering collaboration, and empowering citizens. Our vision is a democratic society with transparent, accountable, and responsive governance systems. What sets CEPA apart? A unique consortium model that integrates expertise from diverse partners for multidisciplinary approaches. We pioneer thought leadership, leveraging tools like artificial intelligence to enhance impact. Through collaborative advocacy, we empower stakeholders to engage with legislative processes, all while combining rigorous research with a deep understanding of Uganda's political economy. Our flagship initiatives include Parliament Watch Uganda, that bridges the gap between the citizens and Parliament. The Policy Digest podcast that explores politics and public affairs across Africa, and the CEPA Convo, our bi-monthly X-Space tackling key public issues. Our work spans parliamentary democracy, human rights, public health, road safety, climate justice, artificial intelligence, and more, including the Africa Regional Conference on Parliament and Legislation. Join CEPA in shaping policies, amplifying voices, and building a democratic future. Visit www.cepa.or.ug to learn more or follow us on social media. The Center for Policy Analysis, a leading public policy think tank.
What makes a government legitimate? Or is there such a thing as full legitimacy or partial legitimacy or legitimacy which needs debate? One of the deep questions that political scientists have grappled with is if a significant amount of people do not give their consent to be governed, does that make that government legitimate? But of course, most of them theorize to governments will still be governments. But I think it's important that we sort of speak about it. So, Ben, I understand you've observed several elections. And for example, here where we are at, in 2016, we had a voter turnout of 67.6% thereabout. We dropped by about 8 points in 2021 to around 59. Not sure whether that's not going to go down this time round. From your experience, how is voter turnout in other areas that you've kind of observed?
It's a mixed picture, and there was a study that The Economist did in Europe a number of years ago where they noted that among young people in every single European country, voter turnout was dropping. Now, what we've also seen is that on votes where people perceive that it really, really matters, and again, this is from another context, this is from my own country in the UK, when we had a referendum on membership of the EU, that was an issue that mattered to a lot of people, and the turnout was extremely high. It was north of 70%.
Wow, that's huge. 7%.
It is, yeah. It was north of 70, I think, and so if people feel like a vote really matters to them and that their vote makes a difference, we sometimes see that seems to have an effect on turnout. Of course, there's other factors at play as well. For example, the voter list and the quality of the updates to the voter list can also affect turnout just by the numbers. So there's a lot of factors at play, but generally, if people feel that their vote counts and if they're engaged in the political process, that's something that starts long before the election, but that will often translate into higher turnout.
And just to maybe get to that Brexit election, you say that it mattered to the British citizens and then they showed up to vote. So how do governments work around driving interest towards the election? Is that the work of political players? Is that the work of political parties? Or is it more or less like something you always look at a chart, like how a doctor sort of diagnoses someone and says, you're having a headache, you're having this problem. Is it always supposed to just be a diagnosis of a declining interest? Whose problem is it to solve?
That's a great question. My personal view is that we all have a role to play. An election affects everybody in the country, and so we all have that responsibility. We all have we will all have the consequences of the results of the election affect our lives, and I'm talking in a general sense here. And therefore, for me, I feel when an election comes around a responsibility to participate. I feel like if I don't participate, then I've got no right to complain afterwards. So I think there's a bit of that, but practically there's a lot that can also be done to engage people in the process. And campaigns such as teaching people about how you can register to vote, encouraging people to turn out. There's lots of organisations across the globe that do great work around that. But ultimately, if people feel like their vote doesn't matter, then they might not turn out at all.
Yeah, they may not turn out at all. Just to get into that, because I just wanted to know from the context that you've analysed, what was causing that declining interest. Do you have any specific case studies where probably people just were not interested? It was any other day of business for them.
Be careful not to call out any specific country. But look, I think that there's the young people issue, which is where the data is absolutely clear, at least from European perspective. The data was so clear on that. I mean, to have in every country youth turnout declining is a big problem, and I think it's probably spoke to an underlying sense that the political realm wasn't maybe doing enough in a lot of countries for younger people. And I think actually this is a positive thing with social media, is that what we've seen over the last decade is an attempt by traditional politics to use these tools and to use these platforms to reach younger people. Now that's definitely positive, but it's important that that's a two-way conversation as well.
I understand that, which I think is a famous argument, which is social media is bad for politics, but come on, it has included people who are out of the spectrum, and I think it's like a +1 or thereabout. People tend to say, okay, it's an evil we can live with, and that kind of thing, and we see how that sort of goes on. So I just, while I read some of the work you've sort of done, there's this word you use often, information integrity.
Yes.
Especially around election. What does it mean?
So information integrity refers to how healthy the ecosystem of claims information that we encounter is. Now, a healthy information ecosystem means that people have got access to information that's important to them. It means that if journalists looking to try to communicate facts to the population, they can do that without fear. They can get the information they need from the sources they need. But it can be harmed, and it can be harmed by disinformation. It can be harmed by a lack of transparency. Information integrity can be harmed by all these things. And so it's such an all-encompassing environment, but ultimately it's something that we all live in, and we all have a responsibility, I think, to seek the truth. And it's in a very serious way, facing some enormous challenges. There's a concept called the liar's dividend, and what the liar's dividend is it's the idea that if you throw around enough untruth, enough disinformation, enough false claims, eventually people don't believe anything. And we've actually seen that in data, that people's level of trust in authorities and institutions that were trusted in the past is in decline.
I get you. No one believes anything. Oh, what do they believe? Just thinking out loud. What do they believe in such a world?
Well, I think it's vital to work that out in every country. That might be sports stars, it might be musicians, it might be leaders within the community. The answer can be different in different places, but in order to build trust in institutions and to build trust in democratic processes, I think it's really important to understand, well, who do people trust now? Because those actors can be allies in communicating fact-based information.
I get you. Just if we're to match the first idea on like declining interest for young people to participate in the affairs of the community, and the question of information integrity and technology being quite a best. I understand that technology faces like a fundamental risk where, because of the algorithmic amplification, you don't get to interact with views that are different from yours. You're feeding your adrenaline. I'm trying to find the language. I don't know. How do you think we can deal with that? Because I see a potential problem around polarization that comes with, yes, having less debate, less healthy, in this case, you said information integrity. The information someone would have a serious problem. Yeah, how do you deal with that?
I think that's right. I mean, the polarization is an issue. That isn't to say that having different views is an issue. That's absolutely vital, isn't it, for a healthy democracy? But when we end up surrounded by people who agree with us, then it's almost a natural human tendency, right? We want to speak to people who tell us that we're right. Well, actually, that's not good. That's not a good thing. We need people to tell us we're wrong.
You're like the most right.
Well, exactly. So I think that this is like almost a centuries-old thing, right? This groupthink where we tend to find ourselves in communities of people who agree with us, and then social media comes along and it pours petrol on the fire, because the algorithms then start feeding us automatically because it keeps us on the platform every day, every second. You've got it. So we need to, I think, as individuals, resist that. We need to, when we find ourselves surrounded just by opinions which match ours, that should be a wake-up call for us as individuals to think, okay, how can I challenge my biases? How can I question my prejudices? Am I 100% sure about what I think? And let's remember that quite often a lot of money is put into the process by which someone forms an opinion. when we have an opinion, sometimes that is shaped by the information we interact with, and that can be affected by advertising. It can be affected by money. So we need to be self-aware, I think.
I get you. The nature of how the thought pattern is evolving makes it quite important for us to sort of speak to those who feed off this kind of echo chamber adrenaline, and that's the rise of populism globally. And I just wanted to just feed into just a bit of context here. Political scientists are arguing that people aren't being very, very critical with how they interact with information as a fulcrum of democracy. And as a result, they are feeding into populist narratives, and pretty much every democracy is grappling with that specific aspect. I don't know what your political analysis is with how information integrity is sort of then fueling this monster of populism, and how we can counteract it with elections specifically.
Yeah, it's a great point, Joseph, and I really do think we need to be careful, because we want people to be inspired by politics, right? We want people to participate and to be engaged and to feel that it's meaningful, and that aspect. That is something actually that populists do well, right? They galvanize large numbers of people, make them feel. Where it goes wrong is the sort of very simple claims that turn out not to be true, attempts to manipulate people. So I think we need to sort of, as democratic societies, think about what does it mean to inspire, what does it mean to engage, but at the same time, we can't fall into using the techniques of those who try to slice and dice and divide us into different camps of us against them. So there is a balance to be struck somewhere, and I think that a lot of countries are wrestling with this.
You think social media fuels that?
I do, yeah, I do. I think that it doesn't need to be like that. I can see a future in which our use of social media doesn't just reinforce our prejudices, but provides it for a healthier information ecosystem. But we're a long way from that. I think we're going through collectively a learning process at the moment. We're seeing the impact that social media can have, but it will take a lot, I think, to get to a point where social media is in a much better place. But you see examples here and there of where, online debates, for example, between different candidates, ways in which people from different parties can interact with one another online. There are different initiatives here and there, but we're a long way away.
How would you go to such a world? Because it's rising. Yeah. I'm saying. I didn't want to cut the United Kingdom, but I see like quite a lot of one-time candidates come, go. I don't want to point that to populism. You come, make your claims, you realize they don't hold in the short term, and then you sort of have to go.
Yeah,
it looks like a real challenge. Do you think community is going to maybe get used to it and just suck it up the way they sucked up the other? How would we move from step A to step B?
I hope not. And you also, I'm sure, Joseph, have ideas about how we can achieve that. I hope that we need to start on a basis of evidence, and this is why the online transparency is so important, because if we have evidence, then you're able to make decisions that reduce harm. And at the moment, the evidential basis is reduced by the fact that there is a lack of transparency from the social platform. So that's a big problem. But I also think we need to just remember our common humanity, and there's a role almost for communities in this. I mean, I've seen, there was a country I worked in where they brought together your local political representatives, so that you were not just having debate at a national level, but you were having debates within the towns. And what that did was that, it brought everyone in the same room. It meant that everybody could see areas of agreement, areas of disagreement. That sort of stuff is good for democracy, and maybe thinking a bit more about what can we do that is an antidote to online polarization is a good thing. But I really want to underscore that doesn't mean that we all can't vehemently disagree. That's a totally legitimate part of democracy, but it does mean treating one another with respect.
Oh, yes. The very nature of online debate, I want to say sometimes I don't want to participate in it myself, is first of all, people get away with sort of, let's say, maligning you if you get to participate in sort of like public debate. People give some sort of adrenaline reward to you if you sort of conform to their opinion. It's also too short. Normally, I come from a debate background, so a normal argument that I will give is 1 minute. If we had to give a 1 minute argument on Twitter, that's going to be a thread of a very long thread. So it's sort of like miniature of sorts. I've seen, of course, X bring things like X Spaces. Not sure about LinkedIn. LinkedIn has its own dynamic. But I think it's a future we sort of need to forge. So from your background as sort of for this conversation, if you are advising like a new electoral commission chair today, what one who just is coming on board, what would you tell him will be the 3 biggest threats they would have to deal with over the next decade as we wrap it up?
You mean globally or here in...
Globally.
Just globally,
that would mean Uganda too, but globally, generally.
Sure. I mean, just to talk in general terms, the crisis of trust is global. That is a global problem. It's a big problem. And if people don't trust in the democratic process, then you start to lose on the very essence of democracy, right? Because people don't participate, people don't trust results. And sometimes that can be for good reason. Sometimes it can just be because the institutions don't communicate well, and for other things like that. So trying to understand where that distrust is coming from is absolutely vital. I'd say secondly, there is a lot of work that can be done well in advance of election day to reduce the potential impact of information manipulation. And so this means things like, for example, the Election Commission sitting down and working out what are the types of false claims that might be levied against them, including as individuals. Individual election commissioners in different places will often face serious threats and false claims about them, about their families. So trying to do that type of risk forecasting can be helpful because it allows for greater preparedness. And I'd say thirdly, civil society is so important. Ultimately, the check and balance on the Election Commission to ensure that they are following the procedures and to tell the population when that might not be the case, to raise people's awareness of how they can be engaged with that process. Civil society can be just a great independent pillar of that, and so strengthening the role of civil society organisations, I think is just a vital part of the picture.
Thank you so much, Ben, for coming to the Policy Digest podcast. It was good having you.
Thanks a lot, Joseph. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you. To your audience, we hope that you learned quite a lot about the emerging threats that democratic participation, specifically through elections, is facing globally, and we hope you picked a thing or two about how we can interact those threats that are emerging. Stay tuned. Thank you for listening to the Policy Digest podcast, the Center for Policy Analysis podcast that is profiling African ideas and people that are shaping the future of their communities. Subscribe to all our platforms on YouTube and Podbean.